Uh, okay, great. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Joanna, and I am a co-host of this event. I'm also a student at Lexington High School.
And hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming today. My name is Jeffrey Lowe, and I'm also a co-host of today's event, and I'm also a 10th grade student at Lexington High School.
Okay, great. I'll be sharing screen really quickly. Just, yeah. Sorry. All right, cool. Thanks so much for coming, guys. Before we start, we'd just like to give a quick speech to kind of start off the night. First, though, a big thanks to our co-sponsors. Jeffrey, do you want to do the honors? Okay, cool. A big thanks to Chinese Americans of Lexington, the Human Rights Committee of Lexington, the Town of Lexington Human Services Department, the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, Bangladeshi Americans of Lexington, Indian Americans of Lexington, Japanese Support Group of Lexington, Korean American Organization of Lexington, and finally, last but not least, Lex Pride. Okay. Great. I'd like to start off this event by asking everyone to name a specific cultural food or dish that is unique to their culture and also distinguishes them from everyone else in this Zoom call. It can really be anything like a festive snack or like a traditional like dessert, but once you think of it, you can either just like not do anything with it or type in the chat. Yeah, and we'll just wait a bit for those answers. A lot of great answers here, a bunch of foods I haven't heard of before, so that's really cool. Okay.
Everybody, but my internet did just cut out, but I'm back now, so.
So maybe you thought of food like from China, something like bakso or India, or maybe even something like paella from Spain. It could even be something like pizza or fries.
And Asia, like the foods that we just all thought of, is home to a breadth of languages, 48 countries, and many more indigenous and multi-ethnic communities.
Yeah, some of the stats are displayed here. But regardless of this diversity, we are all united by this second part of our identity, this idea of Asian American or being American specifically. And though this word means different things to different people, the fact that we're American means that we're all inextricably connected one way or another as a community.
However, this should not mean that we are all the same people or even have the same experiences, regardless of the general Asian narratives. Modern media the official narratives.
And that's things like the model minority myth or the idea of a yellow peril. Okay. Okay, Jeffrey, your audio is not that good, but that's fine. We'll keep going, right? Yeah, and it's for these very reasons that Jeffrey talked about, which probably might have lagged a bit, but these reasons that Asian American narratives have been traditionally portrayed by not just Western media, but a lot of different media in these very stereotypical ways, or in these ways that only encompass a minor portion of the Asian American story, that Asian American people have finally begun reclaiming their narratives, right? Especially since those inciting incidents of Asian hate back in 2020, such as the Atlanta spa incident. Those were the times that pushed our AAPI community to its limits and compelled a silent majority to finally speak up for their rights. Today, here, and through the collected stories of our speakers, all united in their American identity, but distinctly different Asian background, hope to celebrate their distinct differences while exploring the common ties that unite us. Thank you so much for coming. Now it's my pleasure to introduce for a brief speech. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot a full screen.
Thank you, Joanna and Jeffrey. My name is Martha Duffield, and I'm the Chief Equity Officer for the town of Lexington. I'm also a transracial, a Korean adoptee who grew up in upstate New York. While I would like to say that I've always been proud of being Asian and comfortable in my own skin, that is simply not true. Growing up, I wanted to assimilate, to look and act like all of my friends and family. I just wanted to fit in. Despite my efforts of assimilation, I was constantly asked where I was from, as Syracuse was not an appropriate response, confused with my sister, a Korean adoptee who looks nothing like me, or told I looked like Lucy Liu, which would be an amazing compliment if it were remotely true. There are over 23 million Americans with roots in more than 50 ethnic groups in over 40 countries that encompass our AAPI community. Of course, how we look, our skin tone, and our experiences widely vary, yet often we are viewed through a small, particular lens. Our history is fraught with struggle, but also triumph. AAPIs of all hues have been part of the fabric of our country and fought to make lasting institutional change for the good of all Americans in the face of much adversity, including the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese internment camps, and the many hate crimes through the decades that have de-Americanized and dehumanized us. Our community is not only brilliant, but also resilient. Events like tonight are so important to help ourselves, our community, and the larger American population expand our understanding of what it means to be an American and empower our youth to feel comfortable and proud of their own experiences and heritage. Thank you to CALex for hosting this amazing event and inviting me to be part of it. I look forward to hearing the stories from the wonderful lineup of panelists tonight. Being Asian and being American, I am honored for the opportunity to celebrate a handful of our American stories.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Martha. Our first panelist tonight is Kwamran Zama, an electrical engineer and Lexington High School alumni who immigrated to the United States from Bangladesh more than 30 years ago. Currently, she is the Vice President of Bangladeshi Americans of Lexington.
Okay, I think it's my time to talk. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So in my mind, first of all, I did not prepare any slide I did not know that that's an option, so I'll be just talking. An American, in my mind, is an immigrant or a natural born citizen. My parents, grandparents, my 4 siblings, uncles, aunts, and I are immigrants. My 2 sons, 7 nieces, nephews, and a whole bunch of my family, they are naturally born American citizen. I went to Lexington High as an 11th grader. I lived in Bangladesh until my 10th grade of high school. So right now, this year, it makes 32 years I have been living in Lexington, also in the United States. Throughout my life, in the last 32 years, I'm both a Bangladeshi and an American in parallel. But I must admit that I still do my mathematics and multiplication table in Bangla. That's how my first, until 10th grade, first 17 years of my life prepared me. I dream in Bangla most of the time. And mostly I speak in Bangla with my parents, but then when I speak with my sons and cousins, I speak both language. I value and enjoy both identities very much. In day-to-day life, I think, I speak, I dress, and I act like an American from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. when I'm outside my house. But at home, I am both Americans and Bangladeshi. At home, I think, speak, dress, and act like Bangladeshi and American. Outside of my house, um, in the community, sometimes people put me in some sort of spotlight because they look at my jewelry, they question my upbringing, my culture, my tradition. And most of the time I enjoy that. And that happens to my kids too. My maternal grandfather actually came to this country in 1967, and my father did not feel that it was, he didn't feel like coming. It took him extra 23 years to make up his mind that whether he wants to come or not, because we were one of the richest group of people back home. We had very nice and comfortable life. We had on average 3 to 6 servants and maids. So we thought that we are going to be living in Bangladesh, but we finally had to move because rest of my family was here, and also political unrest. So American is full of different kinds of people from all around the world. So I always felt at home here because there are many others like me who actually have different background, and it's a melting pot here. So I do feel very comfortable. I love my sari. I'm wearing it right now in the picture also. But also when it comes to comfort, I love my t-shirts and jeans also. So there are differences. We get to enjoy both American holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. On top of that, we have different kind of our festivals like Ramadan, 2 different Eid, Spring Festival, and my most favorite is Bengali New Year. And there is this festival called Pitha Utsav, where we wear our traditional clothes, we eat our traditional food. And so the blend of 2 different culture, and it's almost like I change my clothes. Sometimes I'm totally American, sometimes totally Bengali, sometimes mixed up both. I very much enjoy being both of my identity, because some Bangladeshi people do not have a very big family and extended family like I do. In our tradition, every weekend we actually get together as a community. I myself am teaching Bengali school on Sundays, every single Sunday, where I get to meet my Bengali community. I also teach at the masjid, where people are not Sunday mornings, are not necessarily Bengali, but they are Muslims. And I'm teaching in the masjid for 4 years every Sunday morning, and 17 years in the Sunday evening. With all the beautiful aspects and the experience that I have here at USA, I do sometimes feel I have bad experience because of my race, gender, religion, skin tone, that when I did face discrimination. So I have handled those unpleasant experiences proficiently and professionally. And I'm sure that my children, even though they are by-born Americans, they will face that too. But I'll take this opportunity to convey a message to our future generations like Joanna and Jeffrey, that with courage, merit, qualifications, competence, and hard work, we can overcome this type of bad behavior and oppositions. I love and enjoy my mixed Bengali and American tradition and culture. I believe it is extremely important not to forget our roots and customs. Like a tree, we humans cannot survive without our roots. It is also true for my sons and next generations to come. So there are values we bring from our background, that is something that I hope that my children and grandchildren will carry on in their life. And that's all I had to talk about. If you have any question, maybe there later you can ask.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kamran. Yeah, and if you have any questions, my internet, please leave them in the chat and they will be answered at a later date.
All right, so next up we have Chris Wei, who began his teaching as a special education teacher at Fisk Elementary School in 2010 and is currently the co-principal of Hastings Elementary School.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining, or thank you for inviting me on. This is a true honor to represent Asian Americans, and this has been kind of a dream of mine to do a panel. Well, I did not do any slides, and I have some notes, but this is what we're gonna, an American idea of winging it right now. So one thing that I like to start with is basically, I don't find my story very interesting. It's really the people before me that came into this country that gave me the opportunities and the abilities to call myself a Chinese American here. And really starts with my grandfather. My grandfather came here when he was 12 from China. He lived with his uncle, and his uncle had a dry cleaners in Brighton, Massachusetts. My grandfather worked really hard. His parents sent him here for education, to be able to provide for the family as well. He went to Boston Latin, but he did not have enough money to go to college. But this is right around the time of World War II, and he was drafted into the war. Now, he had an amazing war career, and that's a different story for another time. He just recently got the Congressional Medal, which is probably one of the highest medals that anyone can get. Or the second highest. There was a big Chinese American World War II event a few months ago. So I would say that after the World War II, he was able to pay for college through the GI Bill. He went to Harvard. He became a chemist. He had his own company. He went back to China, married my grandmother, had my mom, and then he came back here to build a house in Weston, Massachusetts. That's where I grew up, Weston, Massachusetts. So he pretty much brought his family over here and had 5 children, my mother being one of them. And then my father immigrated here when he was 24 and met my mom, and they both had me. I would say growing up as an Asian American first generation, one of the things that was instilled in me was to not be Chinese, to be as to assimilate and be as American as I could be. I think one of the pieces was that they never taught me how to speak Chinese. And so I felt that I was caught between two worlds, one of them being my family. And whenever they spoke in Chinese, my extended family, or they spoke to me in Chinese, I couldn't communicate with them because I didn't know the language. And then to the English speaking world, when I would go to school, everyone would ask me, how do you say this in Chinese? And I would just say, I have no idea. And then, I would get many looks of like, well, you should know, right? And then there are many, many times where just growing up, I was like, maybe I should know. I don't know. So it wasn't until college where I decided to study Chinese. It wasn't the Chinese that my parents spoke. They speak Cantonese. I had studied Mandarin for 4 years. And then I went on a term abroad to China. And I spent about 6 months there. And I would say that was probably one of the areas where I started to grow in my Chinese American identity. It was very eye-opening, just going back to China and just thinking, wow, like, all right, I'm going to be surrounded by many people that look like me. But going to China in itself was also eye-opening because I also felt like an outsider as well. Just going to China, many people saw me as an outsider just because I didn't speak the language fluently. And I felt like, again, I was caught in between two worlds. So it wasn't really until very late in my life where I had my first child with my wife, who is also Asian American, where I started thinking about my identity and how I see myself. One of those areas is, how can I best represent myself so I can make sure my children have a good idea? I'm sorry, I was looking at Dan's comment. So that my children have a strong identity for themselves. And so I married a wonderful Chinese American woman, and she is just like me in terms of, but she knows the language very well. And she has really been able to bridge two cultures for myself and my kids. And so what I like to do is just make sure that we're celebrating all the holidays, understanding why we're doing them. Because growing up, we would celebrate all the holidays, but my parents would never tell me why we celebrate them or what we were doing. And of course, the one piece that I love being Chinese is just all the food. The food is amazing. And that's where, like, food is centered around family, whether it's Chinese New Year, whether it's the winter solstice, we're eating food, we're eating something delicious. And I am so proud of my children because their palates are way better, they're wider than mine were. I was very narrow in what I ate, but they eat everything, and it's amazing to see. So for myself, I consider myself Chinese American. I love being a representative in the school district because growing up, I did not have any Asian teachers. I had one Asian teacher, and I certainly didn't have any Asian principals as well. So I love being a representation for all the children out there to show, you know what, you can do this too. You don't have to be just a doctor or just a lawyer. You can be in education. You can touch people's lives. You can, and you can have a lot of fun doing it. I think that's pretty much it. That's really my story. I like to start with my grandfather's story. My story is kind of boring. I really just grew up as I guess, all-American boy in a suburb in Massachusetts. And for the most part, it was pretty good for me. Yes, I've had a lot of microaggressions. I've had some racist comments thrown at me. However, I think my parents and my grandfather before me did a lot and sacrificed a lot so that I could live that life.
Chris, thank you so much for telling us your story. I'm Chinese American myself, and I empathize with a lot of your stories being like Chinese American and being born here, about kind of like learning the meaning behind my culture from my parents, who thankfully have tried to keep me in touch with like my Chinese identity and teaching me the language, but also like cultural, like objects of cultural significance. And then obviously the food. Oh, we love our food. So yeah, our dumplings, our noodles, our rice, everything.
Dim sum.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously. And then thank you very much. With that, I guess we'll move on to our Caroline Young. Our panelist, Caroline Young, immigrated to the US from Seoul, South Korea when she was 17. And then Caroline has been an avid volunteer in many capacities since she moved to Lexington in 2008. Caroline, please tell us your story.
Thank you. It is a great honor to be here. Today, I'm going to share with you the beginning of my American story and a recent incident that made me think about being an Asian and an immigrant. I was born and raised in Seoul, Korea. My parents got divorced, and my mother decided to move to America with her 3 daughters. She hoped for an American dream coming true for her children. I was 17, my younger sister was 15, and my baby sister was 11. My grandmother, uncle, and his family lived in Anchorage, Alaska at the time, and so we moved there. When I heard that we are moving to Alaska, an image of 2 igloos came to my mind. One igloo for my uncle's family and the other for my family. I was also concerned that I wouldn't be able to eat kimchi because I figured it would be difficult, if not impossible, to get the right cabbages for kimchi in Alaska. Therefore, it was a huge relief for me to find out that Anchorage was a city with normal buildings, houses, and stores. There was a large Korean population in the city, and Korean grocery stores, restaurants, even a bookstore and a video rental place were available to serve them. We found an apartment in the same complex as my uncle's family. I enrolled as a sophomore in West Anchorage High School. When I left Korea, I was a junior in high school, but I was advised to spend a little more time in high school before applying for college. It was at the end of October, and I remember noticing pumpkin decorations in different parts of the school on my first day. I studied English from the 7th grade in Korea. In Korea, the middle school is from 7th grade to 9th grade, and the high school is from 10th grade to 12th grade. In other words, I had about 4.5 years of English education when I arrived in the US. But as I was sitting in a class, listening to a teacher, walking down the hall, hearing the conversations happening all around me, the only thing that I could hear was sound. It wasn't a language. I couldn't distinguish between the words. It was continuous noise, and I kept thinking in my head, wow, they speak fast. On my 2nd or 3rd day of school, I went to the gym for my PE class. I was standing near the wall waiting for the teacher to arrive. A tall, friendly Caucasian boy came up to me. He said, "How are you doing?" Believe it or not, I actually understood his words. They were not just noise. But I froze because I remembered learning, "How are you?" not "How are you doing?" I asked myself, should I answer, "I am fine, and you?" That was what I learned when someone asked you, "How are you?" I wasn't sure I should go with the answer for "How are you?" because "How are you doing?" might mean something different. As I was trying to figure out what might be the most appropriate answer, the appropriate time to answer such a question had passed. The friendly boy said, "Okay," and left. He probably figured that I was either a deaf or someone who couldn't speak a word of English. That was where I started, a constant stream of noise and not being able to answer the simplest question in English. Before coming to the US, I went to girls' high school in Seoul. Like many schools in Korea at that time, we adhered to strict rules. The students wore uniforms. We are not allowed to wear any makeup or jewelry. The hair length was mandated. Coloring or perming was unthinkable. We are strongly advised not to get together with the boys after school or on the weekends. Dating was something you do when you go to college. When we pass a teacher in a hallway, we are supposed to stop and bow. Coming from that environment, you might be able to imagine the horror and shock that I experienced during the first few days of an American public high school. There were kids with a mohawk hairdo with rainbow colors. Many girls were wearing heavy makeup. I might have seen a boy with a makeup. I wasn't surprised by the fact that the students could wear whatever clothes they wanted to, but was surprised to see many of them wearing jeans that were ripped or had big holes. There were couples kissing in front of their lockers. One kid had his leg on his desk while asking a question to the teacher during a class, and he didn't get in trouble. My body, which had been trained for about 11 years in the Korean system, continued to bow whenever I saw a teacher in a hallway. Every day, I came home and cried. It was overwhelming. I felt stupid. I wished for a miracle. Perhaps I would fall walking down the street, and when I got up, suddenly I would be fluent in English and transformed into an American girl. No such miracle happened. But days, weeks, months passed, and things got better. After about a year, I could understand what a teacher was saying in a class, and I was able to have a conversation with friends. I was not near where an 18-year-old American kid would be as far as English was concerned, but I was not crying after coming home any longer. While I was struggling with the language and worrying about applying to a college, I envied those Korean students who had come to the US when they were small children, because they had plenty of time to learn English and get used to the American culture before facing the college application process. But now I look back, I have realized that it was a good thing that I came here when I was 17. It was indeed not easy to learn a new language, get used to a completely new school environment, and apply to colleges within 2 years. But because I lived in Korea for 17 years before moving to the US, my grasp of Korean language and culture was quite solid. When I talk to my Korean friends now, I can communicate with them pretty much about anything without any problems. I don't think I could have done that if I had come to the US at a much younger age. My husband, Alex Carroll, and I have been living in Lexington since 2008. We moved here from Watertown with our 2 daughters, Ellie and Christina. They were 2.5 years old and 6 months old, respectively. Now they are both in high school, and they roll their eyes whenever I say something and find a lot of things I do very embarrassing. I recently read Blue Highways by William Least Heat Moon. It is a well-written book about the author's experience traveling around the United States in the late 1970s. He met many interesting and wonderful people along the way. One of them was Barbara Pierre in Saint Martinville, Louisiana. She said, "Your worst Southern cracker is better than a Northern liberal when it comes to duplicity anyway, because you know right off where the cracker crumbles. With a Northerner, you don't know until it counts. And that's when you get a job done on yourself." Her comment really resonated with me because I experienced exactly what she was talking about not that long ago. I won't go over what happened, but this is how I felt. I felt discriminated against. I felt it was something to do with my race, perhaps my accent. I felt unfairly treated. I felt angry. I felt betrayed. I couldn't believe it was happening in Lexington, Massachusetts in 2019. I felt there were no friends. I couldn't trust anyone in this town. I distanced myself from those who made me feel that way. But every time I read in the New York Times the words betrayal or discrimination or racism or cowardice or backstabbing, I remembered what happened and started to feel down. I don't know about you, but what I often do when a bad thing happens is that I blame myself. So for a long time, I blamed myself for what happened. I am not likable. I don't have charisma. I am not good at persuading people. I come across too eager. I rub people in a wrong way. I whipped myself with this self-critical belt again and again. The arrival of the pandemic didn't help my mental condition. But thanks to the passage of time and with help of my family and friends, I am finally coming out of the dark tunnel. I am hopeful that, however slow and depressing it may be, our wonderful country, the United States of America, is heading toward a more perfect and harmonious union. This is a part of my American story. The road from Seoul to Anchorage, to Northampton, to Tokyo, to Cambridge, and eventually to Lexington hasn't been easy or smooth. But I am thankful from the bottom of my heart to those who extended their hand when they didn't have to and showed me their kindness, thoughtfulness, and generosity when I needed their help. I am grateful for this opportunity to share my story.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Very compelling story. And although like your narrative might be different than like that of some of our panelists, like Chris, or very similar to some of our panelists like Kamran, as she says in the chat. I think your idea of this noise or this fundamental disconnect from what we would call this like mainstream American culture, or how people expect like you to act when you come to like such a new environment. I think you captured that so beautifully in your speech. So thank you so much.
And I just want to make another point on your speech about how you really did touch upon the point about self-blame. And I think that just really resonates with a lot of people who do have to, immigrate to a completely new country and feel the need to have to assimilate to this foreign culture. And I just think that it can touch the hearts of a lot of the panelists and many of the audience members today. But now moving on to our next panelist, Yumio Seniyoshi, who came to America from Japan when he was just 14 years old. He studied business and economics at Harvard and founded the STEM after-school program and Penguin Coding School. Yumio, the floor is all yours.
Hello, hi, nice to meet you all. I did prepare some slides, so I'm going to share my screen for a second. Hold on. So it's not really much of a slide, but a slideshow. Okay, I think you can see that. So I'm from Japan, that's the Japanese flag. So I was actually born in Japan. I was there until I was 14. I went to an international school there, though, so I did have some English, or I knew enough English. So when I came to the United States, I came actually on my own to go to a boarding school in St. Louis, Missouri. And so I wanted to kind of have these slides to kind of show you the journey and some of the incidents I've experienced in my life here in America, and kind of, you know, what has changed, and obviously some things that haven't changed in the 30 or so years that I've been here. So I was born in Tokyo, lots of people. And one thing about Tokyo, or almost all Asian countries, is that it's very homogeneous in terms of like at least the hair color. And you know, and that's what I grew up in, is like, you know, I was the majority. I was an Asian in Asia. And then at age 14, I went to St. Louis. And this is in the 1980s. St. Louis was a very, very typical Midwestern town. The school that I went to was a boarding school. It's like a Christian boarding school. So it was very homogeneous in the other direction, meaning it was all white people. And I was the only Asian at the school. I think there was one African. There were no African Americans at the school. There was one African from Africa. So it's very, very homogeneous. It's it's a boarding school. So I was, you know, with them 24/7. It was a great experience. It was a nice, you know, suburb of St. Louis, and people were really friendly. But all my friends look like that. Well, they didn't look like that, but I couldn't find any old pictures of my friends on my phone. This is before everyone had phones with cameras. So this is just a stock picture, but just to show you that they all look like, you know, what you would typically think of when you go to a white high school. And the movies that, you know, you see in the 1980s, these are the movies. I still remember, like, The Breakfast Club is like a 1980s classic, and people will be like, you know, which character do you, you know, identify with, right? Amongst the high school friends. And as you can see, there's no one really, at least visually, that I would identify with, right? So I had to stretch back to Ferris Bueller, which has black hair. So I was like, you know, I said I identify with Ferris Bueller because I couldn't really see anyone in kind of the culture of that day in kind of white America. And, you know, that's just what you do, what happens when you go from one culture to another. I came here on my own volition when I was 14. So, you know, it was all kind of adventure for me. But one thing I wanted to share was this incident, which happened when I went home from St. Louis to Tokyo for the first time. It was, you know, I was in St. Louis for 9 months, and then I went back home to Japan. I was riding the subway and in Japan, coming back from the airport. And as you can imagine, everyone on the train were Asian, or Japanese probably. And I got this feeling that was very, very weird, which is that everyone on the train looked really ugly to me, right? And it was just like, I still remember this. This is like 30 years ago. And I still remember this distinct feeling of feeling really, really out of my, you know, skin, and kind of fearful that I was like looking at people and like, I couldn't understand why I was feeling this way. And it was a feeling that persisted for maybe 2 or 3 days when I was in Japan, and it kind of like went away. But then, now looking back, I can kind of give a more intellectual answer, which is that, I spent 9 months, an impressionable amount of time with basically, just Western, white American faces, and having that kind of reinforced over and over again. And so I could really see how that had influenced me without really being conscious of it. And that, when you are in an environment that is very homogeneous, that things like this can happen, right? And it's kind of scary that, it's like almost like self-hate that I would feel this way about my own race. So anyway, then I went to Williams College. I worked in Washington, D.C., went to graduate school, worked in San Francisco in tech. Then I ended up in Lexington. I started a coding school called Penguin Coding School. And throughout the journey, I guess my point is that, now obviously these, in the past few stops in this country, since college, I've been around much more multiracial, environments, including here in Lexington, where there's, a substantial number of Asians. And I'm certainly glad that my 2 children, who are both at LHS right now, are in an environment where they're not like the only Asians in the school, or have this experience where, they have to kind of represent their entire race. Because as you can imagine, when I was at this high school, we would have all, racist jokes that here now you would not even, countenance. And, I would go into like a mall with my friends, and with my, friends would try to make me like pretend I couldn't speak English, and then, kind of like try to prank the store, retailers with. And, back then, again, thought this was just like, what it was growing up, and I didn't really think about it, but it's definitely not something that, I wouldn't want my children to have to go through. And I think there's definitely something to be said about, a multiracial community, coming in touch with, being in touch with, different people, different backgrounds, and even just again, visually, when you only see homogeneity, it can really, I think affect your standards and way of thinking. And I feel like, so I became a citizen of the United States. Wait here. I think about 15 years ago. And so I'm very proud to be American now. I don't feel like I gave up my Japaneseness, but I really believe in a lot of the ideals of this country. I'm a proud kind of first generation immigrant into this country, and there's a lot about this country that I love, and that's why I became American. But that, I think this racial thing is something that, as a multiracial country like the United States, it's always going to be with us. And it's always going to be a struggle. And even with with the best of intentions, I think if you remain homogeneous and you remain closed in your own shell, that you don't see how narrow your vision can become. And so, again, I'm very happy that our family is in a relatively multiracial city. That again, relatively speaking, there's more tolerance, there's more understanding of different cultures and appreciation. But that's obviously going to be an ongoing project. So that was my story, and thank you for letting me share it with you today.
No, thank you for sharing. Again, really great story. I love how you focused in on the idea of like an ethnic homogeneity and generally just like Asian representation in media and how like that was touched on a bit and how at least earlier in like in the 80s and 90s and even in the early 2000s, we didn't really see like us or like AAPI figures in the media. However, that's been changing in the last few years with movies like Crazy Rich Asians, and you're really glad to see that. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing. We'll be moving on to our next panelist, Manasi Singhai, the Vice Principal of the Lexington Russian School of Math Branch and the co-chair of the Indian Americans of Lexington Education Committee. Why don't you take the floor?
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who spoke before me. Really helped me clarify my thoughts on what I wanted to share. I'm probably somewhere between the people who came here very young or were born here and the people who came here later in life. So for most people, they've described this one major move, if they weren't born here, one major move where they came from their home countries to the United States. But my journey was actually pretty different. So I just wanted to share a little bit about this. So this is a timeline of my American story, but as you might see, these are all the major moves that I had. For most people, this could be their whole life and many major moves that they do. For me, this was within the first 17 years of my life. So I was born in 1984, and even within that first year that I was born in Mumbai, India, within a few months, I had traveled to London for my dad's job. And then after that, still within that first year, we moved to Queens, New York, where I had my first 2 birthdays. I have obviously no real memory of that time when I was that young. But, you know, my parents had told me lots of stories saying I spoke perfect Hindi. I was very, you know, involved in the culture. And then in 1986, we moved back to Mumbai, where my brother was born. We were only there for a few years. And then in 1988, we moved again, this time to Massachusetts, where we first lived in Westboro, and then Dracut, where I went to 1st and 2nd grade. And then finally, we briefly stayed with some friends in Methuen. So when I was there at that time, again, I don't have very clear memories, but I do remember when I was in the 1st and 2nd grade in Dracut, I was in ELA classes. You know, it was a sort of a separate class that I was taken into for English, where they read books with us. They taught us how to understand the English language. I remember being there with another student, Mangu. I still remember his name, even though I have very little other memories of that time. It was still a good experience for me. I think there wasn't that many Asian Americans or even like, you know, Asians in that part of Massachusetts at the time when I grew up, but we had moved into a large Indian community. My parents had friends there who had children that I got to interact with. I have really good memories of that time. And they're the ones we stayed with in Methuen. But, you know, pretty soon in 1991, we were moving back to India. So for 3rd grade, I was in New Delhi, India for 1 year. That was a much more difficult transition, I do think, like, even though I had been in the United States for a couple of years, it's a very different culture than there is in India in terms of even the schooling. You know, I was behind on some certain subjects. My Hindi language skills had suffered during the time because I wasn't keeping up with it as much. They had brand new subjects that I wasn't used to. So that 1 year in India was definitely a pretty difficult adjustment for me. But we were only there for 1 year before we moved back to the to the United States, this time in Florida. So Florida was a very different experience. Again, it was not as much of an adjustment. I'd only been in India for 1 year, so I still remembered being in the US and how that worked. Plus, again, we moved into, my dad moved there for a company that was, you know, had a lot of other Indians in it. So it was a pretty large Indian community where I had, you know, friends and stuff and people I could hang out with. There was more diversity, I think, to some extent. So I did go, my friend group at least, moved beyond just Indians. So I went to a Catholic school for 6th and 7th grade. So there I had, white friends, I had a friend from the Philippines. So I started sort of broadening my horizons, but that wasn't that was my last international move when we moved to Florida. But there was one last major move, and that's when we finally moved to Lexington in 1996. So that was when I was in 8th grade. And at that point, I told my parents, no more moving. If you move again, I'm just going to stay here, stay with some friends. This is the last move I'm going to allow. So that was sort of a snapshot. So I was in Lexington then until I graduated from LHS in 2001. And going into college, right, that was a very auspicious day that I started college. I was actually driving to college on the morning of 9/11. So I actually heard about the plane crashes that morning, like on the radio as I was driving up to Dartmouth with my mom. And my dad had actually flown into New York that morning. So we were like really concerned, did he make it okay? Was he safe? Getting to college, it was like, I was going there for orientation. Normally that's like, fun time, you interact with students, but there were so many people who were stranded all across the country, couldn't fly in. One of my college roommates wasn't able to even arrive for a few weeks later. She was coming from Alaska. She was stranded in California. So it was a very interesting start to the college experience for me. And also because it was perpetrated by an ethnic community that looked very similar to Indians, we did get, a lot of hate because of that. I was not really interacting with it at the time. I think college, especially up in New Hampshire, was kind of a bubble where I was able to just kind of stay in that and not really interact with it. But when I came back, during the summers, when I did internships, I actually did an internship with the ACLU in Massachusetts. I really got to hear what was going on, how our communities were being attacked. There is, again, I'm sure like we've noticed what recently happened with like, calling the coronavirus the Chinese flu and everything. It seems like anytime that there is some sort of attack by an other community, everyone gets blamed, not just the people who actually did it. Even though we grew up here, we have no interaction with that community, no connection. Everyone who looks remotely similar gets blamed and gets targeted. So that was a big eye opener for me. Like I said, I didn't have many personal experiences with that, but I do remember traveling around that time. Not me, but my brother, who had like a goatee at the time, was always picked for the random check in the security lines. So I tried to get involved. I think like one thing, like Chris said, like, our ancestors, our, grandparents, our parents do inform sort of our directions in life. And I had, my grandfather on my mother's side was very much community oriented, giving back to the community. So I got involved, when I was with the ACLU of Massachusetts, I was doing it through the Indian American Forum for Political Education. So I got involved, I got, organized, information sessions about the Patriot Act, what was going on, to educate our community on, what we can do to protect ourselves, what was, happening, so that actually gave me purpose. I will say when I was in Lexington High School, probably followed pretty much the pretty typical journey, taking all honors and AP courses, we're always kind of pushed towards the math and sciences. I was really good at math, but I had no interest in science. And I was actually really drawn to the social sciences. And I remember my senior year, there was a course, I don't know if it's still there at LHS anymore, called Investigating Lexington's History, where we actually got the chance to do original research on some aspect of the town's history that hadn't been looked in. And at that time, that's the typical age where we struggle with our identity. I chose to look at Indian and Chinese immigration into Lexington. So, I went into the census records. When did we come? I talked to people in the community, interviewed them. Why did you come? Why did you choose to come here, of all places? And that sort of exercise put me more in touch with my own journey. Like, how did I come to be here? That sort of search for identity, search for, what brought us here. And that really encouraged me to stick to that side on the social sciences. It was still a bit of a struggle. I think a lot of us as, students who grew up here feel that pull, like, when I joined college, I actually went in thinking I was going to be a computer science major, but I took one course and I was like, no, this is not for me. And again, I gravitated more towards the social sciences. Then it was like, how do I make this practical? How do I make a career out of this? So then I went into international relations. So at least I could do like government work in that. Then I was pulled into the nonprofit world. So I think that was where I really found a little bit of a grounding. I did like international development conferences. I got these incredible opportunities, but it was because I was open to the idea and I wasn't stuck to the thing that I have to go this way. And I think that was a struggle for me, for sure. But I think it's a struggle for a lot of us who grew up here, who feel like there's a direction that we're supposed to be going in. And if we have ideas of doing something different, having the courage to pursue that, or even having the discussion with our parents, even though they might be receptive, but we're not sure that they are. That's something that I definitely, struggle with, but I pushed through. And I had a lot of really amazing experiences because of that. And I will say, like, a large part of my journey has been trying to find a community, right? I know I had the typical struggles with assimilation, trying to find a group to fit in. But I think what really helped me along my way is finding communities of not necessarily people that look just like me, although that was definitely the case at different points in my life, but people who think like me. And that's one of the beauties, I think, about living in a place like America, where it's not homogenous, right? Like it is in the countries that we came from. There is a wide diversity of people who, even if they don't look like us, they might think like us, and we can come together and we can create something amazing. And that's something that I really appreciate being able to find over here. So for me, again, it was still a long time. I went to DC, I worked in the, as a government contractor, I did a lot of things, but I still hadn't found like that one big pull, like, what is it that I really want to do with my life? And then I reflected on my journey. And I think that's, again, a process that we all kind of should need to go through. And I realized, well, when I was in high school and I was doing my community service hours, I did an education, I was teaching and tutoring. When I was in college and we were doing community service projects, it was still teaching and tutoring and mentoring. When I was in between jobs, I kept on teaching and tutoring. And I was like, this is this common thread that's running through my life. But because of those sort of biases that we grew up with, I never thought that this could be what I actually do with my life. I was like, oh, I'll work for many years and then I'll become a college professor later on in my life. It didn't seem like something I could do now. But, looking back, I came to this point where, I was earning good money. I was in DC, but I wasn't really happy with what my job was doing. I didn't feel like I was making the difference that I wanted to make. And, like I said, like we saying, like our parents and our grandparents sort of, had that influence on us. And I was like, well, I was the oldest of my family here. I was always, helping out my younger sibling, my cousins and everything like that. And then my grandfather on my father's side was an educator. And I'm like, why do I feel like this is something that's not something I can do? This is something that's meaningful. You can make a huge difference in people's lives. And this is something I actually enjoy doing. It's something I don't feel like I'm ever going to get bored with. And that's when I kind of made that final switch. I came back to Lexington in 2014. And, I was still kind of undecided. How do I make this work? How do I know if this is what is for me? And that's when I found RSM. And that was a really great experience for me. I think it really cemented in my life, this is what I want to do. And the great thing about, and I pursued my master's, I now have a master's in education. I'm a licensed teacher for social studies and math for grades 6 to 12. But what I really loved about RSM was, again, I found that community of like-minded individuals who are really, it's not just about, learning the processes, learning the concepts, learning the steps on how to solve a problem. It's about that thinking. It's about teaching people to look critically at the world around them and how do we interact and how do we do something with our lives we are passionate about and that we can make a difference in. And I think that's what I want to encourage everyone is there's always going to be that typical path that, yes, will get you somewhere. But if you can find that community of like-minded people, whatever they look like, that's going to make you as happy as you can be. So thank you, everyone. And I look forward to the questions later on.
Yeah, thank you so much for your speech. Really interesting. I don't think we've ever heard anything like it. About the class, I don't think we have it anymore because, I'm only a sophomore, but I've never heard of the course. However, I do think they have like research and capstone options. And I think a lot of students can do something like that. So just a little update on the class situation. Anyways, Jeffrey.
And I just wanted to make another point about how how just like refreshing it is to hear that someone still is out there who really strives to make a difference in their community, and how it just it's just crazy how this ideology of yours about finding like-minded people rather than people who might like look like you and stuff, it's just it gives me a new perspective on how maybe what I'm doing is not like it's not the direction that I really wish to pursue, and how my happiness and like what I really want to do is more important than some certain other people's influences. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. But now it is my pleasure to announce our next panelist of the night, Jade Doe, who is a former Vietnamese refugee and an assistant teacher at Lexington Children's Place, which is our town's special education integrated preschool.
Hi, thank you for having me. I do have some slides and I'm a little bit nervous how to do this because my third grader is better at this than me, but I'm going to do my best. Let's do a share. Can you see?
I don't think there's anything up yet.
Okay, no?
I don't think so.
Oh, let me try again.
If you'd like, and if that doesn't work for like a bit, you can also send it over to CALex and see if they can share for you, or one of us can share for you. But for now, keep trying.
Let me try again. Sorry.
No, it's totally fine.
Take it
Don't worry about it.
Okay, let me see. Yes, right?
Yeah.
Yay, we got it. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so thank you for having me. My name is Jade Doe, and I wanted to share this first slide. It just shows the typical, you know, Vietnamese rural scenery, but I see that it's, I wanted to show it because I feel like all my life, even now, I don't think that it's ever going to change. It's always a balancing act between East and West philosophies, battling it out. And, you know, growing up, I am a girl in a household of 6 brothers. So I always had to do my best to speak up. And like our other panelists, I felt that in America, I'm very Vietnamese, but when I visit Vietnam when I was 19, I felt very American. And also, I think it was Yumio that, you know, I love the diversity here. When I first went back to Vietnam, I was very surprised how homogenous it was. And I just, you know, wasn't used to it as well. So I just feel like in this, for my life story, I struggle with it. And I want to, with my life experience, I want to be able to talk it through with the younger generation, especially my children, of course. And then in preschool, we have a very diverse, you know, student body because of our town is so diverse. And I just want to be able to, you know, help guide our youngest, you know, learners. And it's difficult, you know, a lot of families are dual language, or, you know, they're like me growing up, you know, being female from an Asian background. And it's hard for us to speak up. We're reserved when we know what's the difference between right and wrong. And, you know, it's always a struggle. So that's my first slide. And So here I have a slide of this year's Lunar Festival. This is my husband, Louis, and my two children, Atticus and Sage, who are third graders and second graders in at Bowman. And, you know, I feel like here, even here, I want to teach them how to remember where they came from, where my story, and, you know, I'm teaching them since they were little how to speak Vietnamese, but even for myself, I came here when I was 4.5. And so I never had formal Vietnamese language training and schooling. I speak it because I was forced to speak it when I was young in my family, but it wasn't cool. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. It wasn't cool. So my brothers and I, to this day, we only speak to each other in English. But when we speak to our parents, we speak in Vietnamese. And of course, now I'm so grateful that I have another language, another perspective. And so how do I teach my kids? And this is both parents speaking Vietnamese, whereas for myself, I have, you know, I'm only myself am a Vietnamese speaker. So, you know, you have to teach them with every meal. We say the Lord's Prayer in Vietnamese, how I did it when I grew up, and, you know, listen to Vietnamese music. And then we tried to do Vietnamese school here in Arlington, but then pandemic hit and it's been struggling. It hasn't come back. You know, but I have to teach them the very basics so that they know how to interact when they meet their grandparents, you know, how to be respectful, what's the hierarchy, how to invite people to eat at dinner time, just the bare minimum. And, you know, I so wish that I had a stronger formal training. And, you know, mine was just when as an adult, I took my grandmother to Vietnamese church, and there was one reading in English and one in Vietnamese. And I can now read Vietnamese just conversationally and not very well, like no political words, no scientific words. So there's that constant struggle as well. And here's LCP. My children went to preschool here. When Sage, my youngest, started kindergarten at Bowman, I decided, you know, I was volunteering a lot at Bowman, and I decided, you know, maybe I should start having my own life and just slowly get back into it. And I just love the staff at LCP. So I had some hours and I just thought I could just come and just, you know, join LCP. And so I've been there since I think 2018 or 19, and right before the year pandemic hit. And I've been here for 3 years now. And, you know, I am shocked at our diversity, how it's shown in the preschool classroom. We have, you know, speakers from like 15 students, and probably 13 speak in another language at home, from Arabic to Vietnamese to Chinese to Mandarin to Uyghur to Farsi, Turkish. So, you know, and recently with my background in Vietnamese, I was very lucky. I had a small play session with 3 triplets just to assess how their language is developing. And I was just so happy to contribute in that way, and just imagine, like, if other students are able to have that in their own languages when they first come. You know, they're shy. I remember not knowing English, even though I started here in kindergarten. I couldn't quite understand it fully all the way until the halfway point of my second grade. So it takes a while, and you're nervous and you don't know how, you freeze, you know, just you don't know how to say it, who you're hurting, as another panelist mentioned, you know. So I get it, you know, and I just want to support these friends, you know, to speak up, to self-advocate for themselves, You know, it's a different from different cultures. You're taught a certain way, when to speak up, how to speak, and if you're a boy, gender differences, and all of these are hard to navigate in a new, you know, starting school at such a young age. So I'm just enjoying, you know, what role I have here at LCP right now. This is a picture of my parents and us in the August of 2019, right before, this was our last, our last big trip. We went to a wedding in Poland and for our younger cousin. And I just wanted to show you my parents because it's really their story of how I came here to be. And this is my mother. This is the year before she got married. She was married at, she was married in 1966. She was only, I think, 18. And then in 1975, this is the war, the war ends between the North and the South in 1975, and my mom was only 27. She was full term with me in 1975. So the fall of Saigon is in the end of April, is when the Americans finally leave, and she was full term with me, so I came a few weeks later, and actually we had plane tickets to go to California, but we couldn't because of my mom being full term with me. And then it wasn't until 1979 that we leave, and she's only 31 years old, and there's, you know, I'm the youngest of 5 children at that time in 1979. So, you know, my father actually, he was he was a translator for the military police, and he tells that even at the end of the war, his American friends kept trying to pull him to leave with them as they were evacuating, and he was so afraid of being separated from us. He would just keep jumping down, and they would fish him and put him back and try to take him, and he would refuse and just kept swimming back to us. But you know, because of his what he did as a translator in the military police, the government, the communist government, felt that he accused him of being CIA, and so imprisoned him. And so from 1975 to 1979, it was my mother who was the sole supporter of our whole family, as well as her own family, as she was the eldest, and her mother was widowed. And so it was up to her to support all of us, including like tons of nieces and nephews. And it was up to her to figure out a way out. And this is our little boat that we finally leave in after 3 attempts. The first attempt was by purchasing passage on someone else's boat, and that fell through. The authorities were alerted. Then the second time was we had a boat under our relative's name, who was a fisherman, because we were city people. And the relative decided to keep it for his own because it was, you know, he was just fishing by net, and then he was finally able to go further out into the waters and get more fish, and so he just kept it, so we couldn't. And so finally, this is the boat that looks pathetic on the outside. This is our final attempt, and on the outside it's just a shell, but the inside was like a new engine, all of that, that my uncle, who's my mother's younger brother, was able to put together with another friend of his. And this uncle is actually an engineer now, a retired engineer now for Volkswagen, because when we finally left and went to Malaysia, he enlisted to go to Germany, where it was, you know, that's where you would go if you wanted to become an engineer. And this is our trip from.
Really sorry, Jade. We're just running a little bit short on
Oh, okay.
time,
I'm sorry.
so
All right.
no, it's okay. Yeah, but
Okay,
if you
I'll wrap
would
it
you
up.
be okay with like wrapping up a little bit? Thank you
Sure.
so much. Your story is so great.
So this is just one of my memories. This is a stock photo. This is just a memory of me actually after a big storm, you know, we were fished up onto a big vessel, and the vessel took us to a island called Pulau Bidong in Malaysia. That was a refugee camp. And this is where we landed. And this is something that my mom tells us, that we actually had a little stand like this selling porridge and cigarettes and mosquito nets. And I wanted to share that. And this is the island when we finally left after 6 months. And it was a Catholic church that in Buffalo that sponsored our family. And here we are. This was at the wedding in Poland of my younger cousin. And this is just like the female side that we came in our traditional dress. And I just want to share this photo showing you us visiting my parents, and, you know, just hoping to keep our roots alive, our story alive, and, you know, having a bond, a connection with their parents, my grandparents, the children's grandparents, my parents who live in Texas. And, you know, you just get to see them maybe once or twice a year. And it's just so important these days to make sure they have a bond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jade. Really sorry to cut your story short, but I love the detail you went into, and also how you touched on how other minority identities intersect with AAP identity. So just like, even like being female, that impacts like our AAPI experience. Yeah, anyways, we'll be moving on really quickly to our last our last panelist, Salvador. Hello. Salvador is an undergraduate student at Harvard, the 2020 president at LHS High School, and a current town meeting member. You have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Many of you might recognize me as I recently ran for the school committee, so I guess the candidate drop was familiar, but it's such an honor to be here today and at this event and hear such inspiring stories from my fellow panelists. And I'm really excited to share my own story as well as the story of my family as well. So let me pull up my slides real quick. Here we go. So as Joanna mentioned, I'm Salvador. I'm a LHS 2020 graduate, town meeting member of Precinct 5, and a current student at Harvard College, where I'm on the pre-med track, hopefully to become a doctor one day. And so my story begins in the Midwest, in a rural part of Indiana. I was born in a small town surrounded by cornfields. Sometimes I joke with my mom that when my grandfather chose to come to America, he just threw a dart on the board, and that's where we ended up. And very much so, that's where we lived early on in my early life. One of the things I think really shapes my experience and my own identity is that I'm actually Korean Mexican American, which has been something that I take great pride in, and it has obviously influenced my own perspective of the world and my experiences. And so I hope to speak on that a little bit more. But first, I think it's really important, as Chris mentioned early on in this forum, is the importance of recognizing our ancestors and the generations of people who've worked very hard to give us our opportunities here. And I think one of the common themes I have in my family is just a history of particularly strong women. And I think here down below are pictured is my great-grandmother, my grandparents, and also my mother. And I think the story of my great-great-grandmother and my grandmother in particular are very, very profound. My great-grandmother she had 6 kids, and during the occupation of the Japanese, they had a textile business. However, when the North attacked the South, Seoul, she was running away to the southern parts of the Korean Peninsula when she was shot by North Korean soldiers. And so the baby, unfortunately pictured in this photo, did not survive because my grandmother was the only one who was there to really take the reins of the family and to really try to fill the mother role for her other 4 siblings. And so her story is really profound to me in the sense that she had to work very hard to help her own family to work and to really struggle through her challenges. And so eventually she met my grandfather, and they got married, and they had my mother. And my grandfather worked for the United States Air Force. He fought in the Korean War, but he also particularly worked for the Air Force with radio technology. He was on one of those radio towers for the planes coming back and forth. And my mother was also born, and she always tells me about her stories growing up in Seoul and moving to America in 6th grade. And so that's kind of where we turn up. This is also a picture of my grandfather at the 38th parallel, which is where currently where the North and South Korea are divided, which I think was a great photo because at Lexington High School, we have this great opportunity in junior. It's called the JRP, to research any particular part of American history. And one of the things I chose in particular, where I learned a lot about my own family history and looking through very, very old photos, was the Korean War, and thinking about who was involved and how the people struggled during that very difficult time. And so it's something that I always spoke with my grandparents, especially my grandfather. And so it's something that still resonates with me today, and our journey to America. So I think what I will say, as someone who was born in America, but having a mother who really supported me and who came from that background, I think my mother was somebody, she is somebody if I think of the most inspirational person in my life, is my mother. And I think it's because of the struggle she shared as being a young Korean American in Indiana, right? And one of the things many of the experiences that Caroline brought up really resonate too, because these are the stories that she really brings up to me almost every single day, right? Of her, not knowing the language, right? Really struggling in her classwork, and to really struggle to, integrate into American society. And I think, she'd never had the opportunity to go to college or to do many of the things that she wanted to because of those challenges. And so, as I grew up and as she raised me and my brother and my family, she always instilled these values that, what's the most important is faith and hard work. And if you have those 2 things, you can get anywhere you want to get to. And so I think those are the things that, I really strive to, and I always try to live up to. And, growing up as an Asian American, it was always something that I always thought about. I think, the first half of my life, I grew up in Indiana, so there's not many Asian Americans in Indiana. And so I used to be the only Asian student in my classes. And it's something that I always, at times struggle with, but at times really thought about, because I think it was really hard to find my own identity, right? Being Mexican, being Korean, being also American, it was something that I think even today, I still struggle with too. Understanding where I fit in, right, into our own society, and even in terms of my own race and culture. And so it's something, though, I've been ingrained in all my life. Korean food is a big aspect of my life, eating kimbap, tteokbokki, all the Korean foods I'm very familiar with, right? And something that I really enjoy and love to eat on behalf of my mother's constant cooking. But as many other Asian American students, music was a big part of my life, and family in particular, and my little brother and cousins. And so I think it's something that really, really I reflect on every single day, thinking about. But I think what's really, really important is thinking about my place and thinking about my own identity. And I think one of those things that I really try to do is try to be an advocate, right? And I think in many ways I do want to become a doctor, and I do research and really enjoy science, but I think really trying to represent underrepresented minorities is very important, and to bring perspective. I think nowadays there's a lot of noise in the political sphere and in our government and across the world. And I think what's really important is to really share our stories, right? And to really present a very different perspective in our lives, right? We all come from somewhere and we all represent different voices. And I think that if somehow I'm able to present that voice and to help better our community, I think that's what I've always tried to live for. And that's what always I hope to accomplish in my future, no matter what I do or where I end up. And so I think being Asian American has certainly been a part of that identity, and understanding what does that mean for when I'm in, at Harvard or at LHS, or even one day in my career, what would that mean to be one of the few in the room? And so I think that looking at how we look at race in our country, how do we understand the very challenging topics we have to deal with as a society, it's something that I struggle with every day, but I also think it gives me hope, right? The more that we have people, more people like me, more people from biracial backgrounds, or people integrated in different cultures and different races, I think one day, right, these experiences and this integration of cultures and sharing of stories really help us to be better and to do better in our communities and in our country. And so I really believe that, and something that I keep to my heart every day, and to build up on my own identity. And so I think that's more about me. Hopefully there'll be more to write about in the future, but I think that's where I'm at right now. And I do want to leave time for our panelist discussion, so I will end there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salvador, for sharing your story. Got a lot of great comments about it. I guess we'll be moving on to our Q&A now. So if all the panelists could turn on their videos, that would be excellent. Okay. All right. Great to see everyone.
Mhm.
All right, let's start off with a pretty basic question. Jeffrey, do you want to do the honors?
So for our first question of the night, it's going to be, what does being Asian American mean to you, and how do you think that you kind of define yourself as an Asian American? And feel free to unmute or raise your hand.
Yeah, and also if you have any lingering questions for the panelists, feel free to either drop them in the chat or just raise your hand. For example, originally we were going to start with this question, but it actually seems, Caroline, that there's a question for you in the chat. So if you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I was just reading Helen's chat question, but I think I don't feel comfortable sharing in this venue about what happened. As I mentioned, it wasn't somebody just saying, racist comment. It was kind of a bunch of events that made me feel that way. And it really bothered me because it wasn't something that I expected happening, because as I said, I was living in Lexington and it was 2019. So I was taken aback, and it really made me think about where things were. But after reading and thinking, and I came to the realization that we all face certain pain and suffering. It doesn't have to be racism. It can be, mean teacher, it can be terrible boss. We all go through certain obstacles in life. And I think that was the obstacle I had to go through. And thank you for your kind words that it wasn't me and I shouldn't blame myself. And I'll try to remember the next time it happens that it has nothing to do with me. But, when things like that happen, you immediately go, I mean, maybe not many of you do that, but I do immediately go to myself, what have I done wrong to deserve this kind of treatment? But the answer is actually none. So if young people, if you face these kind of obstacles, don't try to, yes, you have to, I guess, sometimes reflect upon your actions, and maybe there's some kind of misunderstanding, and you try to present yourself and act in the best way possible. But try not to do what I did, which was blaming for yourself for what happened. So, as I said, I am out of this dark tunnel that I was in for a while. And I do have a lot of wonderful friends in Lexington. So I'm not now in this mode, like I cannot trust anybody in this town that I was in for a while. So I don't want to give the impression that I am not interested in getting to know anybody, or I'm dying to move out of Lexington or anything like that. But it was substantial enough that I was feeling down for a while. But the point is that we all go through, some kind of obstacles, and we have to just kind of keep moving forward and try to treat others the way you want to be treated. I hope that answered Helen's question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for providing. Okay, Chris.
Thank you for sharing that, Caroline. That was, I appreciate your vulnerability, and also just sharing your story about just something that that is triggering to many of us in terms of your experience. But just going back to that one question about what does Asian American mean to me? For me, as I said, I came late into my realization of my identity when I started having my kids. And I think one of the pieces that I've learned is that being, at least for me, Chinese American is something that is just utterly wonderful. It is something that I can be proud of in terms of I do consider myself American. I love everything in terms of what my parents have thought what America brought to them in terms of opportunity. And what I love about being Chinese American is that there are still things I'm learning about in terms of tradition, in terms of family, that I can adopt into my life. And there are some things that I can, it sounds kind of bad, but I can pick and choose. I can bring some of these traditions that, my family have brought into and I grew up with to my kids, but also put a spin on it. And it might be an American spin, whether it's celebrating Thanksgiving with a traditional turkey, but also on the side, having hot pot or having some sort of other, my world centers around food. Okay. So I personally love just being able to learn about being Chinese as I'm 40 years old, and also sharing that with my kids so that they can adopt some of these things that my parents have really want me to kind of carry on with them. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Chris. I know your point about pick and choose might seem a little like a hot topic, but I think you actually touched on a really unique part of being Asian American in that our culture is syncretic. We get to essentially we are a mix of both, and so we don't have to really stick to one another. That's America is diverse, and that's what we love about it. Does anyone else have any additional comments? Because we actually have a great chance to transition into another one of our questions about essentially like bridging bridging gaps between ethnic communities or even like cultural communities, such as like what we would consider like a white community or like the traditional American community and like our subdivided AAPI groups. Kwamran, you asked a really great question about like how students can interact or like how like student groups can interact with each other and how we can provide like a general public with greater understanding of not just our culture, but our history and how it got here. So I was wondering, just opening that to the floor, if anyone had any like takes on that.
So I don't mind going. So I do think that this is like, a really important initiative. And I'm actually very happy that Lexington, when they appointed Johnny Cole as the diversity director, they've been doing a lot to try to engage the community. So I know like I personally have attended events in town, even at the school, where they actually asked us like, what is schooling like in India? Like, what are the common sort of ideas that parents have about interaction with teachers or education? And I felt really good that they were asking those questions, because I think it's important, because, as people were sharing, like, as Caroline was sharing about how, what it means to be a student in Korea versus what students, how they act in various situations here, it is very different. And if you don't understand that cultural context and be able to kind of bridge that gap and teach that to the teacher so they know, what backgrounds their students might be coming from, and understand the meaning behind certain reactions from their parents in certain situations, or how they, what they might believe. I think that's a really important thing to have, so we can avoid misunderstandings, so we can, have the best, most inclusive community that we can have. So, and I'm actually really proud that a lot of our groups, like, all of the Asian communities in town, ABCL, CALex, 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 JPLEX, all of us have gotten together and worked together on so many initiatives lately. I think that's a really positive sign that we are looking and collaborating and trying to find those common, like I said, like-minded people, right? We have all things that we want to accomplish, and that we can do it much better together than we can do it separately. So I feel that sense of community is really present here.
Yes, I'd like to say something. I would agree so much with what you just said, and I am really proud of what our school system is doing inside. I see it through Bowman, with just, if you're a parent and you want to share your traditions and cultures, then you're welcome to come into class and share it. I see that with my husband's group, ABCL, our group, the Association of Black Students in Lexington. Actually, I was brought to our host's attention through Sean Osborne. And I feel like there's, it's like-minded thinking, as you said, and, and I see it in various aspects of Lexington life. And or my daughters, all of her friends are Indians, and she'll do her talent show as a Bollywood dance, or and there's just a lot of sharing and a lot of activism and awareness here in town. And that makes me very proud to be here, and it's making me push myself as well to come out of my comfort zone and be more engaged in, to be active here in town. So I see that happening in Lexington. And as an Asian American, it's not always easy for me. But I want my children to be active and to be in school. I'm proud of my husband when he's active in our parish and in ABCL, and it's making me want to do so as well. So, and I'm happy to meet everyone's stories, and I heard last year's video panel speakers as well, and I'm just the more you reach out, the more you're exposed to what's out here in Lexington. And I think it's a great town for us to be in and share our story. And I'm happy that we all have that opportunity tonight.
Thank you, Jade. Chris, would you like to share?
Just in terms of what schools are doing now, Lexington has done such a wonderful job at making sure that we're represented in terms of having children see themselves in education, whether it's in the stories that we read, in the history that we review. I think there are some simple things that we can do just in our school systems to make sure that when our children grow up, they can be able to have these open conversations with each other. So really teaching them how to be effective communicators, to have open conversations, to be able to share about themselves, and to listen to other people. I think building effective relationships is the most important piece to understanding anyone. And in order to build those relationships, you need to be able to be a good listener. You need to be able to kind of tell your story as well effectively. I always love to connect with people through humor. And I think connecting people in whatever way you feel might be good, whatever you're confident in, go that route, whether it's cooking food, whether it's humor, whether it's telling an amazing narrative that many of our panelists have done today. But I think making sure that many of our children have these skills to be able to do that as they carry forward and become adults.
Okay, all right. Mona, I was wondering if you had anything you want to add, given your role in Lexington.
Well, I think I'm really proud of the role that the Human Rights Committee has played in some of this. Over the years, as you know, right now, Tanya is the chair. Previously, I was the chair, and before that, Sean Osborne was the chair. And over the many years of advocacy for over our terms, we have really tried to support and encourage more, not only diversity, but also looking at data, systemic spaces. And certainly, as Dr. Hackett recently said in a presentation to the Human Rights Committee, change only happens when the community speaks up. So it's so important. Right now, LPS is working on decolonizing curriculum. They're looking at data more closely. And these things happen because the community spoke up. And I will say, as a person of color, as an AAPI, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable being a person of color and then talking about racism. I think what's really tough, particularly in the AAPI community, and I will say, I'll speak for my own experience, sometimes for AAPI women, is that the assumption is you should be a good Asian girl, be a model minority, be a model minority, have a quiet voice. But if anyone knows me, I don't, and I won't, because I think it's so important to speak up for these issues, not just for my own children, but for future generations. So I'm very grateful that we were able to partner with LPS through advocacy and through cooperation. And as you can see, we're making progress. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Joanna.
Yeah, no problem. Actually, this is kind of funny because I guess we'll be closing up our Q&A panel and going back to you, Mona, because you will be closing off this event tonight.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's good. So I would like to, let me get out my thing. So I'm Mona Roy. I'm from the Town of Lexington Human Rights Committee, and we're proud to be co-sponsors of My American Stories. These stories were really incredible. Mukul and Jade reminded us that having your roots affirmed in early years gives you the strength to face challenges later on. Yumio reminds us that affirmation can be found in living in racially diverse communities like Lexington. Mansi talked about redefining what the word community means and taking ownership of it. Sal spoke to the optimism of a multicultural upbringing. These are many experiences, and they speak to the beauty and, yes, sometimes the heartbreak, like Caroline's, within our AAPI community. Our history is fraught with struggle, but also triumph. Chris Way's grandfather getting the Medal of Honor reminds us that AAPIs of all hues have been part of the fabric of our country in fighting for all Americans in the face of much adversity through the decades that have sometimes de-Americanized and dehumanized us. Our community is not only brilliant, but also resilient. As the first, but definitely not the last AAPI chair of the Human Rights Committee, I was proud to be part of the last year's debut of this meaningful program. As an AAPI, South Asian American, Indian American, Hindu American, and Bengali American, similar to our panelists, I am proud and grateful for all of my identities, for the knowledge, values, and dignity that I have received from my own cultural roots and upbringing to give me the strength to continue to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in all spaces, which is, as I mentioned earlier, particularly challenging because I too am a person of color. The Human Rights Committee is organized under the Town of Lexington, and members are appointed by the Select Board to build a stronger, more unified town that respects and recognizes both our diversity and our commonalities. And we confront statements and actions that conflict with these core values. The committee works to foster respectful, civil, public discourse and debate. Some of our functions include addressing civil rights complaints, conflict concerns, educational, community programming, active bystander training, examining systemic spaces, as I alluded to earlier, and working with other town departments and committees, as well as public advocacy. In addition to our wonderful partner with LPS, we also work closely with Martha on many initiatives. We also have yearly events to highlight special days on different initiatives. One of our most popular events is the MLK Community Conversation on Race, where hundreds of people gather with their friends and neighbors to discuss a particular topic related to race. In addition to our standalone events and initiatives, we also co-sponsor events like this one, which are in sync with our town values. In short, we are here for you, and we want to hear from you on anything and everything because we believe in community and we're stronger together. So I'll put this in the chat. We would love for you to come to our website. You can, if you have any concerns or complaints or just any opinions, you can always contact us. You can file a formal complaint, or as I mentioned last year, our DEI inbox gets some love. We're always happy to see and hear perspectives, whether they're personal or whether they're anonymous. I would like to thank tonight's speakers for sharing their personal stories with us. Tonight was emotional labor, but also a labor of love. Hearing these stories is an opportunity to both celebrate our diversity and cherish our shared humanity, to honor everyone's unique American story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona, for closing off the event. And with that, we have officially finished this year's My American Story. It was so great to hear everyone's perspectives.